Mary Ann Polly Nichols was the first of the canonical 5 of the Jack the Ripper victims. She was discovered in the early hours of the 31st of August 1888 in Bucks Row, Whitechapel, by Charles Cross, who was on his way to work. Cross called over a passerby, a Robert Paul. Paul, unlike Cross, believed that Polly was still alive. The two discussed briefly what they should do. They decided to pull down her skirts and report her to the first policeman they came across. Before they could, though, she was found by a PC, John Neal. She was pronounced dead by a local doctor, although it wasn't until she was transferred to the mortuary that the extent of her ordeal was realised. Polly was 43. Aside from their involvement as targets in this case, the victims are often overlooked, being treated almost as a side note in the case. But Polly Nichols, as with the other victims, was much more than that. She was born to a decent family, she was educated, she was married, and she was a mother. And Polly, like many other victims of crime at the time, weren't just victims of the actual crime, but also as a result of the socio-economic conditions of the time. So how did Polly come to be in Bucks Row early that morning? Well, that's what we'll be looking at in today's video. Polly was born Mary Ann Walker on the 26th of August 1845. She was the second child of Edward Walker and his wife Caroline, and she was born in the family home in Dawes Court, Shoe Lane, off Fleet Street in London. She became known as Polly from a young age. Polly's father was a blacksmith, and although they weren't considered well off, he went to work on the printing presses in Fleet Street, giving him an increased wage and a more stable life for his family. In November 1852, Polly's mother passed away, having contracted tuberculosis, and her younger brother Frederick succumbed to the same illness in April 1854. Polly would have assisted the family in taking on some of the domestic chores that her mother would have performed, but Polly also had the benefit of an education. And schooling wasn't compulsory at that time, and it wouldn't become so until 1870, when it became mandatory for children between the ages of 5 and 10 to attend school. Before this, school was offered on a private basis, and Edward paid for both of his children to attend school where Polly would learn to read and write. Now, it was unusual for the time, but Polly would remain in education until she was 15, and it's said that she could both read and write very well. Polly is described as being 5'2", with a dark complexion, dark brown hair, grey eyes and high cheekbones. On the 16th of January 1864, at St Bride's Church in Fleet Street, 18-year-old Polly married William Nichols, a printer also employed in Fleet Street. The couple had 5 children: Edward, born in 1866, Percy in 1868, Alice in 1870, Eliza in 1877, and Henry in 1878. Early in the married life, the couple rented a room in Bouverie Street, but they would go on to move in with Polly's father and brother at 131 Trafalgar Street, and 3 incomes would have allowed them a relatively secure and stable life, though by no means luxurious. Her brother married in 1870 and left the home, so the loss of that wage, a 3rd child around the same time, would have meant some worry for the future. However, in 1876 the fortunes took an upturn when they were accepted and moved into the newly built Peabody Buildings on Stamford Street in Southwark. The Peabody Buildings were funded and built by American businessman George Peabody, who wanted to help those living in the East End slums. Applicants were vetted before being accepted as residents. They were required to provide a letter of recommendation from their employer, and they also had to pass a home visit. Those afflicted by drink or with a criminal record weren't accepted, and income, along with the size of the family, were also taken into consideration. There were also rules for residents. Subletting was prohibited, children weren't permitted to play on the stairs, everything was to be kept clean, and laundry was not to be taken in. Now, for the time, these apartments were a luxury. They had indoor toilets, separate laundries, a heated bath downstairs for the block to share, and space for children to play. Another baby came in 1877, followed by a 5th and final baby in 1878. William claims that in the 5 years after moving to the Peabody Buildings, Polly had begun drinking, and that this had become a problem. Polly's father, who Polly had remained close to, told a different story. According to Edward, William had begun an affair with a 21-year-old neighbour, Rosetta Walls, whilst Polly was pregnant with the 5th child. And what's perhaps worse is that Rosetta was the person that Polly and William had hired to help nurse Polly through her confinement, imagine. So we don't know the truth. But it does seem odd that Polly would start drinking after moving to the Peabody buildings when the circumstances had improved so much. And given that the rules there were so strict, if Polly had begun drinking to the point that it was causing problems, you would think they would have been turned out, as others had. Plus, I don't claim to know the psychology behind drinking, but don't people generally drink to forget the problems? Like maybe if the husband was having an affair with the nurse? I don't know. I may be speaking out of turn. But William and Rosetta did go on to have children, and they did marry after Polly's death. So it does make you wonder. Whatever the case, sadly, something did go terribly wrong between the two. They quarrelled a lot, and it's said that Polly left William on several occasions, only to return. But in March 1880, Polly and William would split for the final time. Again, note that it was Polly leaving William, leaving the children, 2 of which were under the age of 5, and leaving their luxurious flat. And back then, women didn't have the same rights as men. She wouldn't have been able to support herself the way that William could. She knew what she'd be losing when she left William. There had to have been a good reason. After she left William, Polly can be traced through several workhouses. From the 6th of September 1880 to the 31st of March 1881, she was at the Lambeth workhouse where she gave her profession as a charwoman. There's then no record of Polly until the 24th of March 1883. Back then, divorce was uncommon, and it was expensive. The workhouse was feared by the poor and looked down on by the rich. It was a place of last resort where bullying was common. Workhouse inmates were made to perform labour-intensive jobs for poor food and uncomfortable dormitory beds. The workhouse was humiliating, and it was intentionally that way. But entering the workhouse was the only way that women could gain a legal separation from their husbands. If they could afford it, a man could divorce his wife simply by claiming that she had been unfaithful. But if a man was unfaithful, this for a woman was not grounds for divorce. Wives just had to put up with it. Gotta love those Victorian morals, haven't you? The workhouse was funded by the parish, and it wasn't for the public to support a woman whose husband had abandoned her. So the workhouse would have helped Polly to obtain maintenance from William, and she managed to obtain 5 shillings a week. However, in 1882, William stopped paying this maintenance, and when he was summoned by the magistrate to explain himself, he informed them that Polly was living an immoral life. Now the court sided with William, and Polly lost that maintenance of 5 shillings a week. On the 24th of March 1884, Polly moved back to 131 Trafalgar Street with her father. However, her drinking caused problems, and she left there to go to the Lambeth workhouse on the 21st of May 1883, where she would remain until the 2nd of June 1883. There's no further record of Polly until the 21st of October 1887, and it's believed that in this time Polly lived with a man by the name of Thomas Drew, although she was seen the year before in 1886 when she attended the funeral of her brother, who had burned to death when a paraffin lamp exploded. If she had been in a relationship in that time, it didn't last, because on the 24th of October 1887, she arrived at St Giles Workhouse. Now they transferred her to the Strand Workhouse the following day, and she stayed there until the 2nd of December 1887. And on the 2nd of December 1887, she was arrested by the police for sleeping rough in Trafalgar Square, and they returned her to the Lambeth Workhouse as a destitute, where she remained until the 29th of December. On the 1st of April 1888, Polly shows up at the workhouse in Mitcham, leaving on the 16th of April when she was transferred to the Lambeth Workhouse. And she left the Lambeth Workhouse on the 12th of May 1888 to take up a position in domestic service in Rosehill Road, Wandsworth, for the Cowdreys. It would have been nice, wouldn't it, if this had been the start of a new life for Polly. Although domestic service was undesirable, it appears that her duties there may not have been too taxing. It was only the Cowdreys and an adult niece. Mrs. Cowdrey bought Polly new clothes, including a new bonnet, and Polly would have had her own room in the attic. But Polly was the only servant there, and it's likely that she became quite lonely with nobody to speak to. And 2 months later, in July, she absconded. Mrs. Cowdrey informed the trustees of the Lambeth Workhouse that Polly had stolen clothing worth £3 and 10 shillings. Now, whether she had stolen the clothing in the truest sense of the word isn't clear. It's likely that Polly had taken the clothes that Mrs. Cowdery had bought for her. She may have sold some of that clothing to get some money initially. It's not known. Although she appears at the Greys temporary workhouse on the 1st of August 1888, the whereabouts in the weeks leading up to her death comes from witness testimony. So she was staying in a lodging house called Wilmot's, and this was an all-women's lodging house located at 18 Thrall Street. And there she shared a room with a friend, Emily Holland, and 2 other women, for which she paid the price of 4p a night. However, on the 24th of August 1888, she moved to a lodging house at 56 Flower and Dean Street called the White House, and this lodging house allowed both men and women to stay there. Now, Polly's friend Emily Holland would later say that Polly didn't like staying at the White House because it was overcrowded, and it looks like she tried to move back to Wilmot's. On the evening of the 30th of August 1888, Polly was seen at Wilmot's lodging house, but she didn't have the money for a bed and was turned out. As she left, she told the house deputy to save her a bed, saying, "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." She wouldn't return. At the time of her death, Polly's worldly possessions were her clothes, a black straw bonnet trimmed with velvet, a red-brown ulster with 7 brass buttons, a brown linsey frock, a white flannel chest cloth, black ribbed wool stockings, a grey and a white petticoat, stencilled as belonging to the Lambeth workhouse, short brown stays, flannel drawers, and men's spring-sided boots with the uppers cut. And alongside her clothes she had a comb, a handkerchief, and a broken piece of mirror. Polly was laid to rest at the City of London Cemetery, Little Ilford, Manor Park Cemetery, in public grave 210752 on the 6th of September 1888. Authorities marked Polly's grave with a plaque in late 1996. In the next video, I'll be talking about the second of the canonical 5, Annie Chapman. And similar to this video, we'll be looking at Annie's life from its beginnings in Paddington in the west side, so the posh bit of London. Surprised? I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.